Yep, that's a hole in the drywall. You might get a hole like this if your doorknob opens up and goes through the drywall, or anything like that will cause a hole like this. In this video, I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to repair something like this. So stay tuned, and without further ado, let's dive right in. All right, so this method is going to take a minimal amount of materials. You don't need a whole lot. You could call this a California patch or a blowout patch. We're in Florida, so I'm going to call it a Florida patch. Now, our hole here isn't really that big. This method will accommodate a little bit bigger of a patch than I'm going to show you here today. But nevertheless, the size of the hole, you do need to cut this out bigger than the hole because drywall kind of blows out from the back, as you can see right here. So we're just going to make a random size hole. I'm not too worried about exactly what size it is or if the corners are square. Now, one thing that you do want to make sure of is when you're sawing a hole out like this, to be cautious of what's behind the wall. I'm doing this because obviously this is a fake wall. But if this was a real wall, you could be worried about plumbing, you could be worried about electrical, insulation. You don't want to ruin that if you're on an outside wall. All right, there we go. Now, if you are on an outside wall and your area has a vapor barrier, you might notice that you've damaged the vapor barrier now. So you might want to tape that back together before you continue. All right, so for this next part, you're going to need a scrap of drywall. You can get these squares of drywall like this. It's like a 2x2 square. It's a little expensive compared to a whole sheet. Notice that I've marked the square about 2 inches bigger in both directions than my hole. So it's really easy to cut this. All you need is a knife. Just kind of score the line. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're not building a piano. Both directions. Right? Kind of put your arm in the back right here and give it a smack. Maybe. There we go. Now just score the other side. And voila. Do the same thing with our short piece, kind of smack the back, like so. See, it's about 2 inches bigger in both directions, but what we need to do is mark the back, kind of hold it where you want it, and make it about 1/4 inch smaller than your hole. Do the same thing with the other direction. And we'll just join those lines together. Now let's play tic-a-tac-a-toe and just score all the lines. And do the same thing and go ahead and break it, but this time we're not going to cut off the front. Now all we got to do is peel off our squares, our little sections here, just like so. Leaving the paper. Now let's give it a test fit. Oh yeah, that's going to work. It might be a little bit big, so I'm going to shave off my paper. All right, so we're ready for some mud. Now I prefer to use a tray like this. I've got some powder in there called Easy Sand 5. Now what that stuff does is it dries really quickly and it allows you to do multiple coats in one day, so you don't have to wait a long time between coats. But if you're not in a hurry and you don't care, then just use the premix stuff. That way you don't have to buy 2 different types of mud. Now some people prefer to use a hawk. No, not that kind of hawk. This kind right here, it's just a flat surface that you put your mud on. You spread it out that way. I prefer using the tray, especially with this powder stuff. It's easy to drop the water, especially if you're not used to it, and you'll just make a big mess. So let's go ahead and mix this up. Just put some water in there and slur it around. Now, it doesn't really matter if you get it too thin, because you can just add a little more powder. Now, you do have to work pretty quickly with the 5-minute stuff. You're looking for a consistency kind of like this. the 5-minute stuff will dry up on you. So just kind of swipe some on the inside there. Now for the top, it has a habit of not staying, so just do the best you can with that. And you'll want to get some around. Don't worry about perfection. And just kind of put your patch in there. Careful not to push it in, because then you'll have a big recess you got to fill up. Get as much of the excess off as you can. So we're just going to have to let that dry, and we'll be back. Now, some people like to sand between coats. I usually don't find it necessary. What I do is I take a clean knife and I kind of go over it, cut off all the high spots. So I'm going to go ahead and put on another coat, pretty much doing the same thing. I usually use the easy sand stuff on the first 2 coats, and then I'll use the premix coat on the final coat. It just sands easier. All right, got my second batch ready. Now you do want to keep your corners pretty thin, not your corners, your edges. And one trick that I use is I'll apply pressure to one side of the knife, like this side here, so like that. The edges are thin, because the thinner they are, the less sanding you got to do. Something like that. It's only the second coat, so if you wind up with any lines in there, it's no big deal. All right, so we're ready for my premix mud. Now, I did sand a little bit after that second coat. There were some areas in there I didn't like, and the scraping of the knife wasn't going to take care of that. So same thing, you might want to add a little bit of water to your premix. That'll help kind of smoosh it out when it goes on there, so it's not all cottage cheese. Same thing with the edges. You want to put your knife like so and scrape off that edge. That's pretty good. If it's not perfect after the third coat, you can always go back and touch it up on a little bit of a fourth coat if it needs it. If it doesn't need it, 3 coats is usually pretty good. Now, I also like to use a fan between coats, and that fan blowing on there will definitely speed up the process a bit. And of course, when you sand this, you want to sand these edges so that it just completely disappears into nothingness. The rule of thumb is if you can feel it, you'll see it. So you want that smooth transition right there so that you don't feel anything. And of course, always primer new mud. Don't try to paint this directly before you primer it first. And don't use the paint primer mix. I usually like to use straight primer for something like this. Okay, so that's how you do that kind of a patch. I hope this video has been helpful. Thanks for watching.